Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to Day-to-Day Democracy, a podcast about local government in British Columbia, what it does, what it struggles with, and the people trying to make it work. I'm Arjun Singh, and this is,
Brian Frenkel.
yeah, and we have a great guest today who's coming on, Gladys Atrill and Mayor Smithers. We're discussing every local government in British Columbia, and it is where democracy meets real life. And it's also where expectations are very high. Authority is limited, resources are tight, and public pressure can be relentless. So that's our synopsis of what we're doing here.
It is relentless. I
Yeah.
think even it gets more so now to factors that we have no control over, Arjun. You and I were just talking that you look at what's going on around the world and we're the local politicians that people vent to, right? So whatever happens around the world, we normally see that coming back to us, right?
It is kind of interesting to think about how citizens see government and that kind of that almost that lack of trust that is
I
kind of
agree.
almost eroding,
Yeah,
right?
I
I think
agree.
bringing that back in the local government, I think has the most potential to sort of uh, build back better trust and also rendering into what's called silly season colloquially in the world of, of stuff. So we'll see how the campaigns kind of heat up on that, right? Uh, Brian, just as we begin, I wanted to um, talk a bit about some news, some more recent news around the province. I just want to focus in on two individual local government officials that you and I know quite well. So,
Mhm.
Charlie Hodge, I read an article today in the Kelowna Capital News, I believe, online. Uh, Charlie Hodge, the angel of council in Kelowna, and I think to myself, like it's so nice to read a appreciative story of a local government official or any politician anywhere, to be frank. But Charlie is a legend in Kelowna. He's retiring after 4 terms
Yeah.
on city council. He's a former journalist. He just the most salt of the earth guy. Like he's always just like a backslapping, really friendly kind of a person. He represents in his sort of mindset is representing the common person, the transit driver, the working people, folks who are maybe struggling a bit more in the society, and also really a big advocate for parks and green space and things that are green. Um, Charlie also 16 years ago was given a diagnosis of having only 3 to 5 years left to live with all these ailments he's had in his life. And sometimes when I see Charlie, he's got a breathing apparatus when he's walking around because he needs the oxygen to kind of keep himself, right and tight. But Charlie, we're just wishing you all the best as you finish up a storied career in Kelowna City Council, and we wish you all the best going forward and long may you run. Now, Charlie's got a cousin who's also a local government person in Coquitlam. That's Craig Hodge, our old UBCM buddy. And
Hmm.
Craig is running for mayor of Coquitlam after many years of being on council. So, uh, not that we're taking sides, whoever runs, runs, but Craig's a great guy, and we wish him all the
Yeah.
best. And he's been a very, very big person on provincially with the UBCM board and also
Yeah.
Metro Vancouver. So, just these families that are serving across the province in different places are pretty awesome.
Yeah, Craig's running for a position. Our friend Richard Stewart is not running again
Yes,
for mayor. And so he's running for that position. And Richard Stewart, health problems as well. Uh,
also retiring,
good person.
which is amazing.
Part of our local leaders for mental health group. But he and I started this 3 or 4 years ago. Just I think what it does, Arjun, is it tells us that there's really good people in every town running for council or regional district or school district. They all mean well. Uh, and it goes back to that building the trust, whether it's the Hodges, the Stewarts, whoever it may be. There's this trust out there that people don't seem to have, but there's not a soul that wakes up and says, how are we going to screw over the residents today? There's not a
Totally.
soul that does that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great comment. Speaking of mental health and and just folks who've been really under the gun the last little while. We both want to send our regards and best wishes to the counselor in the district of Tumble Ridge. I had a chance to watch a bit of their March 2nd council meeting this morning, and obviously still reeling from this incredibly tragic shooting, and also carrying on the business of their community. I was struck by watching that video, just the solemnness which they started, the heaviness, like you can see and
Yeah.
how they're all feeling, and also, the sort of work, the good work that they were continuing to do for their community. So, all the, best wishes to those folks as they stir their community through a very challenging time and do incredible work. Um, just as you're talking, Brian, I'm reflecting on, um, I think obviously we all have, as leaders all have to model good behaviors. Local government, elected leaders, candidates for office. I think everybody has to try and model the best behavior. We're all watching, and we're all taking the lead of the people that are in the media,
Yeah.
and who we kind of see often. This crazy man down south is not a good example. Donald Trump, I have to say.
No.
So, we're certainly having to be very, very try and counter that channel all the time. Um, Secondly, I would say that obviously, thankfully, most of us don't have to experience what happened in Tumbler Ridge. We do. I mean, local government officials, and obviously, I was one. You guys are still,
Hmm.
there's still a lot of people who look to you for when things are really horrible, things bad happen, when there's a wildfire, when there's a bullying incident, when there's we had in Kamloops a snowbird crash, and
Yeah.
2021 or 2020, and that was a really peak COVID. A Air Force officer lost her life. And the city was quite traumatized. Obviously, the nation was traumatized,
Hmm.
and our mayor at that time had to hold that space for the community. Did a beautifully, Ken Christian, in my view.
Yeah.
And I'm sure in your service you've had times where people have come to you and said, uh, just help us through a very challenging time.
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel that it's difficult sometimes to be on top of, when you were on council, did you feel it was tough to be on top of everything or
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I
you
think you
never
do your
knew.
best.
Yeah.
And but it certainly is. I mean, it's probably virtually impossible to keep on top of everything. You just
Yeah.
kind of have to keep on doing the best you can.
But that's where it's expected by a lot of individuals in our communities that you
Yeah,
are on
yeah,
top of everything. And there's no book that you or I or a mayor or regional district take a look at and say, okay, well, here's what I should do. You're learning because we're evolving so quickly as a society and the need for information. It just it's so rapid and it's very difficult to keep up.
yeah.
Changing economies and population growth or decline and all of those things. So,
It just reminds me also another great support for folks, and it's happening. Maybe it's happening right now. Is the Local Government Leadership Academy that has their spring forum. It's happening actually starting on Wednesday in Richmond.
there you go.
And those folks there, I was involved with that for a number of years, and we used to do a session in the evenings, kind of a nightcap session. People just kind of have a bit of conversation back and forth. And I remember quite a few discussions about challenging situations where um, local government officials could share various perspectives back and forth and help each other and support each other.
Yeah.
And I think, again, building on what you're doing with mental health with Richard Sturt from Coquitlam and others, these peer networks are just so important because, yeah, you don't get that from a book.
Here's a quick test for you, Arjun. Who do people go and talk to if your garbage date changes and you didn't know about it?
The
Right?
mayor,
Yeah. And what happens if your property taxes go up? Who do they go and talk to?
the mayor.
Yeah. And then if the ER wait time is 8 hours.
They're still the mayor.
Yeah, exactly. And there's where we are is that we're trying to differentiate what the mayor's responsibility is, but in communities in British Columbia, it's just about everything. Our guest today is Mayor Gladys Atrill of Smithers. Gladys has been mayor of Smithers since 2020 and has been on council since 2014. As mayor of Smithers, she represents her community on the regional district of the Bulkley and Chaco Board and BC Transit. And on top of that, she took on the role this year as the president of the North Central Local Government Association, which then gets her a board seat at the Union of British Columbia Municipalities. Welcome, Gladys. Glad you're here.
Thanks, Brian. Happy to be here. Happy to join you both.
Gladys, I'm so happy that you're here. You're one of my favorite people and favorite people in local government, favorite people just generally speaking. So we'll jump into some questions for you here. Um, we know local government is often one of the biggest expectations, meet the smallest toolkits. So what has been the most challenging moment you faced as mayor, and what did it teach you about serving a community like Smithers?
It's hard to think of one thing. I would have to say, as someone who was the pandemic mayor, probably overall, the pandemic was the biggest challenge. Trying to figure out how to navigate on the fly, how to work with citizens and staff, how to work remotely. None of those things were there before, getting the
Mm-hmm.
calls from the provincial government every week saying this is what we're going to do. And I commend them for it. It was, planning on the fly. Here's what we're going to do. And then trying to roll with those, with our staff and with citizens. And at first knowing how well it was going, despite the, how challenging the circumstances were. And then watching what happened in community, not just my community, but communities writ large. The challenge of community divisiveness, people being concerned, people not knowing or not wanting to kind of go with what was being prescribed. And witnessing that change in community, I think, is probably the most challenging thing I have found. I've always said that one of the joys of Smithers is it's a community of diversity. Opinions are varied. Community has always been that way. And I think it's overall resulted in really good decision making. But in the last few years, it's become a bit more tense. And I think that's taken that diversity to divisiveness. And my hope is that we'll recover from that. So probably, aside from particular issues, there's always a hard issue, but that's been the most challenging thing is trying to navigate now. How do we bring people back to be a whole community where that love and
Yeah.
respect for different opinions rises to the surface again?
When you go back to the pandemic, I think in every one of our communities, we understood that there's probably a difference of opinion on a lot of things. We all understood that. Uh, but do you think that that was a turning point for where we are now? Do you think it was the key moment where we've sort of changed and now we see more divisiveness?
I certainly think it was an accelerant. You know, um, I think there are lots of changes in the world as people become more tribal, if you will, but
Mm-hmm.
that seemed to be a real accelerant for that, where people gained more traction and choosing not to believe what was presented by, government who I think was actually trying to do the best possible
Yeah.
in a really, living situation where we didn't know. But so I think it moved us along faster, although we may have gotten there anyway when we see what's going on in the world. That divisiveness is not just in my community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gladys, I really, I mean, I identify you as being someone who's really good at kind of people, just people things, people skills and the idea around, how to actually build trust with folks and bring that back. So, I mean, I think I feel the same way. I mean, there's been such those divisions, that diversity has become more divisive. And I just kind of wonder about, what you think, are some of the things that can be done, maybe at the local government level particularly, but anywhere, to try to build back that sense of like, you know, community coming together and being diverse but not divisive.
I don't know for sure. I
Yeah.
think it's going to be one conversation at a time, one small win at a time, trying to demonstrate that, what we said is what we did. And
Mhm.
I mean, recently we had a very challenging public meeting over homelessness and shelter. And someone else had suggested it to me, but I started the meeting by inviting people to bring their best selves. It was a
Mm.
big crowd, and just offering to those in the room that there were differing opinions, and that the greatest opportunity we had was to truly listen to one another and demonstrate respect for one another. And then we'd see where we got to. And whether it was that or whether that's the way the evening would have rolled out anyway, overall, I think people respond to that. We're going to demonstrate respect for you. We're going to listen and we're going to get there. And I think we witnessed that evening that, whatever was there, 150 or 160 people, for the most part, were
Wow.
very respectful and they heard each other. So I think it's going to be that one conversation at a time.
Well, that sounds like it's doing it almost at scale. So, wow, that's a really powerful example, I would say.
Um, so let's take a look at Smithers, and it's I wouldn't say it's a rural community, but it is. So we always envision Smithers as a place for our family that we go out, and tourism is big, and we
It's
go to
it's a big
visit.
it's one of the big smokes for you guys up there.
Yeah, it's great. We've walked that ski hill over your shoulder, and we have skied it. So I'm glad that we've gotten it into summer and winter. Not we, but what's the next biggest opportunity for Smithers, Gladys? Where do you think your town's headed? You were part of tourism back before you came mayor. Is it still going to be tourism?
Well, I hope actually one of the strengths of Smithers over the last 100 years has been, diversity the other way, a diversity of economy. I hope
Hmm.
that's the future. Certainly, we're seeing some things loom larger than others right now. In Northwest British Columbia, you can't help but notice all the energy that's going into the mineral exploration and mining sector. It's
Hmm.
referred to by the province and by Canada as these, the nation building projects that are to the northwest of us. So community will be affected by that. One hopes in a positive way with people being here and bringing energy and good intention to the community. But I still hope that we are an economically diverse community going forward. It's been our strength in that when one sector goes down, others can buoy it up. So Smithers is a little hub for certainly mineral exploration and mining. We have good transportation services. We've got the railroad here. There's agriculture, there's tourism, there's forestry, there's retail. I hope that's our future. That said, who knows? It's a changing time. You talked about our downtown. It's certainly been one of our assets, but it's struggling. As people
Yeah.
make different decisions about how they make their purchases, about who they support. We're in a time of change. There's no doubt about it. And maybe these are my Pollyanna glasses, but I am relying on the people in this community, and I am one, to keep supporting the community. That's what makes it strong. The ski hill that you talked about,
Hmm.
um, being able to go to the river, being able to go to the mountains. People live in communities that are good to live in. And we need economic opportunity. Absolutely. We need to work with our neighbors. Absolutely. But I think one of the obligations of the local government, not just local government, but certainly us, is to ensure we are doing our best to build a community worth living in so that when people come to different projects and they make a choice of where they're going to put their families, that they look upon this community as a decent place to put their families. So again, a bit of a ramble, but I think it all comes
No.
together. We need to be supportive of sectors that we think are important and still put our actions and our money into the community.
And affordable.
And
We're
as you're doing,
affordable, right?
sorry?
So in the north, we're affordable. There's
Hmm.
affordable housing, and I think we're going to see that draw come to our communities more so. And you've seen it, and I've seen it, Gladys. That we start the people that are retiring are moving to places that one they can get on an airplane, and then be in Vancouver within an hour, and their
Mhm.
house is five, six, $700,000 and not 2 million. So
Right.
I think that's the one of the once I don't want to let that secret out of the bag to everybody because we don't need everybody to move up here. We need you to come visit for sure. But
Well, I mean, maybe this is a question that we kind of had in the question list, but it's sort of maybe one for both of you is and you guys just love to get your it's building on what you're saying around this idea of uh, preserving the character, the livability of a place, and also welcoming economic development, the right type of economic development. And I guess who do you say no to is kind of an interesting, or who do you say maybe less of? It's kind of an interesting conversation there as well. So like, you know. you have your OCP, you have your zoning bylaws, you have your economic development strategy. Um, Obviously, you have people in the community who are advocating for a whole bunch of different values. Um, what are you thinking around, tools for that and mechanisms for that that seem to be, effective in Smithers and Bryan all over the north?
Hmm.
Well, maybe I'll come at that a different way. I think one of the things for our community is Smithers is small. Our boundary is small, so we're a small community, but our opportunity to grow within the boundaries of the municipality are limited. So we have to think about that a little bit differently. How are we going to develop, in terms of housing? Everyone needs more housing. We've had the luxury, as many communities have, of building like subdivisions that are single family homes. Well, I think that's essentially over. We don't have the room for another subdivision like that. So how are we going to recreate our housing stock? That's not a simple thing, but we're going to have to do it. We're there. How do we carve out some more land for out of what we have to make homes for those businesses and industries that want to be here? Uh, so again, that's going to be a challenge for us. There are some places, but we're going to have to work hard with the province and with our Indigenous neighbors to make sure that some of the land, the small parcels that are available in the community, can be utilized going forward so that we can be that welcoming home. As far as, you said, who do we say no to? I think the council that I'm a part of now has been very sensitive to, what is it that we're being asked when an industry comes to us? And, does it make sense for our community? As I said, we're a pretty broad spectrum in terms of what naturally happens here. So we haven't been asked for anything too strange. I would say the things that are hardest to say yes to, and they haven't landed at the council table, would be things that are all risk, no gain. Some of the products that might move to the port, that are, you know, dangerous materials that are moving through communities like Smithers, like Vanderhoof, like Burns
Yeah.
Lake, where you're getting all risk, no particular benefit. Those ones are going to be more of a challenge. And then we are active with the Northwest Resource Benefit Alliance, where now we're pretty firm with industry about this is not just us supporting you, it's you supporting us. You have to know that for us to make way for more industrial development, more housing, more anything, we need supportive industry. We can't do that on the backs of residents. And it's an interesting shift in conversation. So we're willing to hear you. We're interested in being a part of it, but you need to support us too. And that means carrying that message to the province as well to ensure that we get this financial boost that we need over time. We cannot afford to build, more roads, more water lines, more sidewalks on residential taxes. It just won't work.
Yeah, it just won't work. You touched on collaboration, Gladys, and that's pretty crucial in a lot of our communities. And maybe you can describe how important that is in working with collaborating with not only the RBA but your neighboring communities, your regional district, your First Nations, all of those. How important is that since you've started even back on council days? Like, where do you see that going, and how important is it?
Well, I think it was happening when I joined council. So, you enter a storybook when you are first elected, that there is a story that has a history and you just land in it and you hope to catch up in time. So many of the relationships with other local governments were firm. They're through structure, they're through the regional district, they're through the regional hospital district, through NCLGA. So you just sort of land
Yeah.
in that story as it's being told. And I think over time, some relationships get stronger and some get more fractured depending on what's going on. Overall, I feel like those relationships are pretty good. I think a challenge in Smithers over the last few years has been more relating to First Nations. And it's because of the complexity, I think, of the Wet'suwet'en governance structure
Hmm.
here. About the time the pandemic hit was about the time that the province greenlit the CGL pipeline, is about the same time that the Wet'suwet'en chiefs said no, and we sat in the middle of that. So there's still a healing and a learning that's coming from that. And meanwhile, many of the First Nations communities have been carving their own path forward. So we still have a lot of work to do there to figure out how does all of that play out over time. How do the different communities want to work together, want to work with us, and that layered in with the chief's office. So I don't have an easy answer to that. We're going into a community to community later this week. This is going to be one conversation at a time. It's absolutely clear it has to happen, but how those conversations, start, stop, I think that's still a work in progress here.
Well, and none of this seems easy or is easy, right? And I think the
No.
work that, part of my sort of frustration as a citizen is watching some of the conversation provincially and nationally, being it's sort of like it's kind of like zero sum. It's either indigenous or non-indigenous, or it's private property, or it's Aboriginal title. Where this is a very big opportunity to actually to build relationships and to build on ones that have already been built all over the place. When I've had the fortune of traveling the province and talking to local government, folks, lots of people have very good base. The story has already been very, very good. The stories have been very, very
Mhm.
strong around the work that folks have done at the local level and regional level with Indigenous neighbors in all sorts of different ways. And one of the fears that kind of is that some of the stuff around the questioning around the court cases and DRIPA and UNDRIP and what it all means, it gets caught up in this very, very like polarized zero-sum conversation. So I think I'm very thankful that community forums are still happening and that you folks are still
Mhm.
engaging in those in a very good way because we really need them. And so I'm much as a question more than a comment, Gladys, but you can jump off any way you want with that.
Well, I think just my understanding is the C2Cs may be coming to an end, but we're having one this week, and then maybe I'll say it this way: the funding for them is coming to
Yes.
an end.
Yeah.
The opportunity for them continues, of course. Yeah, we'll be meeting some new people this week. There have been some changes, as there always is in community, as the leadership changes. So in some ways, you start the conversation again, and then hop back into the storybook, as I've been saying, to see
Mhm.
where we go, what's important to everyone, and how do we work together? How do we identify those? So, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
What the outcomes are, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the process is a good process, and one that, Arjun, you touched on it quickly there. It gets politicized at a BC or federal level, and that's not what's going on at local government. Local government's trying to learn. We're sitting down with people from our neighboring communities. We're doing the best we can, and then you get a political decision or a court decision, and then it's blowing up for the media, so it's political favor down the road, whether I get your vote or not. And that's not what we do at local government. We're working behind the scenes to make sure that our relationship is good, and we're trying to stay on top of some of those things. But
Can I just ask a couple of quick questions before, just on terminology? So just for people who are watching may not know, Resource Benefits Alliance. So what is that?
It's a partnership between 21 local governments, between Haida Gwaii and Vanderhoof through our regional districts, where for I can't even remember how long, Brian may remember when this started.
it's been a long time.
Um, there was an initiative to say that the cost of industrial development is difficult for communities to manage and called upon the province for a revenue sharing agreement.
Hmm.
And we are now, I think we're in year two of our first agreement, completing year two of a 5-year agreement. Those of us on the steering committee were in Victoria last week, touching base, making sure that everything is in line to get the language I'm using is an enduring agreement, one that will go on. So it is a way for our local governments to receive a portion of the revenue that's generated by industrial development in our region to build supporting infrastructure, those things we talked about earlier, so that if businesses want to come, they're not moving into a place where everything's just falling apart under their feet.
Hmm. And that's revenue generated outside your borders necessarily, right? They come in
Yes,
from outside into the community because the impacts are in the community with hospital, rec centers, and downtown streets and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So of course, if we think about northwestern British Columbia, the development, the industrial development is going to happen for the most part outside municipal boundaries. Prince Rupert is really the outlier to that with the port. But for most of us, the development will be outside the boundaries, but the businesses will need places to set up shops. Their residents are going to live somewhere. They're going to need to access roads and airports. So some of the impact will be felt within communities.
Hmm.
And back to the beginning, we want to be able to host people to live in our communities
Mhm.
and to develop businesses, but we can't, as you all know, we cannot afford through just residential taxation to build all that infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Well, while we had economies around us, whether it was forestry or mining, agriculture, you name the economy, it was always around our communities. And I, Gladys, maybe you know the number, but I always had heard it was about 70% of the the value or the GDP or whatever you want to call it went to Victoria and never came back to our towns. And so that's, we never got full benefit for what was coming out of our area. So a lot of that funds were supporting everybody in the lower mainland, right? And so
Yeah.
they turned away from us. Is that?
Well, and I think, there was a thought that the employment was the payback to
Mm-hmm.
communities. And when communities had enough scale that, in Smithers, we still have one sawmill that's within our boundaries. So that's it. That is our one, heavy industrial taxpayer. That's a burden for them as well. Um, and the employment packages that people have is not enough to pay for all of the infrastructure. We used our RBA funds to do one road last year that was just really in atrocious condition. So from the ground up, doing the drainage, redoing the storm, like doing all of that plus sidewalks, it's $2.7 million. Well, a 1% tax increase in Smithers is 100 grand.
Yeah,
We will never build a road. So without that sort of injection of funds to support the infrastructure, the town will just slowly crumble. We cannot do it on the backs of residents.
we would love your taxation. We're 1% for us is 58,000. So,
Yeah.
and so that's the point is that people
Yes.
really need to understand taxation is not the route. Not It's not the route for industry in our towns, commercial in our towns or our residents. So
And I
it's
do
not a lot
think
of money.
I think we can do a better job of explaining to our residents what they get for their money, though.
Mm.
I do hear people comment on the taxes, and I pay taxes too. But then if you sort of parse out, well, for that bill, if your tax bill is 3,000 or 5,000, that the cash you part with, and you think about that over the cost of the year, and you think about the value of the roads and the sidewalks and the water and the sewer, and Arjun talked about the recreation facilities,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you just think about that value that you receive. It's actually really great value.
Hmm.
And I think often local governments are on their back foot defending ourselves because nobody wants their taxes to go up and they don't know what they're getting. And it's like, but they're getting a lot.
Yeah.
We do those little
Yeah, that's a
things
good
that go out in
point.
the tax notice, but I don't think they stick. It's like somehow we have to explain it better as well.
I think we
Yeah.
also have to normalize the idea that paying taxes is not a bad thing.
It's a great
It's
thing.
actually a very good thing.
It's a
You
very
know,
good thing.
it I mean, obviously there's a level of affordability and I won't get too much into what's happening in Kamloops except to say that, our tax increases in Kamloops, for example, have been structurally much higher than they've been the last 2 years than they were before. Not saying the current council is not doing a good job because I think they've been trying very hard, but policing costs, are just one massive factor of things.
Right.
Other things that are coming up that are, asset management, concerns that are kind of coming into it more and more. So I think that's just a challenge for folks who are, and the whole financial system for local governments, as we're saying, is a bit broken and a bit antiquated. So that's a topic maybe for another day, guys. But I wanted to ask you this sort of a little bit of a advice question. So, as we all know, it's not that long now before the local government election. People are gearing up to kind of think about, you know, running or rerunning or and so, what advice would you give folks about running, about leadership, about resilience, with all your great, sort of service and your experiences and your, sort of insights. What are some of the things you could give people as kind of advice?
Um, it's going to sound kind of silly. I think do whatever you can to stay calm.
Oh, that's good.
However you do that, whether you, whatever methods you have to stay calm, someone to talk to. There's two parts of that. One is while you're running, and one is once you're elected. And I think you don't know until after you're elected that there's a network of people like this, that when things are going off the rails, or when you actually just don't have any idea what to do, well, phone someone.
Yeah.
There's like so many folks around that will tell you because we all lived the same thing. And I remember when I got my first phone call, when something was going funny in my community, and it was actually Brian's former mayor Jerry who phoned me one day and said, "Hey, I've been reading the paper. How you doing?" And it's like, whoa, like so nice. But you could do that the other way and just go, "Here's an issue. I don't know how to deal with it. Pick up the phone, phone someone." So that's it's like try to stay calm, hear people, plant your feet on the ground, just listen. And then if you don't know the answer, it's okay. You can go back again. People phone calls. I don't know how many times I've had people say, "Oh, I never actually thought you'd phone me." And I said, "Well, why wouldn't I phone you?" So just be calm, hear them, and try to do the best you can. You can't fix everything. You don't know everything, and not everything is your job. As we all know, we're going to get all kinds of calls and criticisms for stuff that is not the municipality, but we're compelled to help or we wouldn't be in these roles. I've phoned many organizations on behalf of citizens. You don't have to do that, but we probably will. So yeah, be calm, have a network, listen, and just do your very best to answer people.
Fantastic advice.
Yeah,
Just
I agree.
beautiful. Yeah.
I agree. That's why you're one of the good elected officials.
That's our first guest ever in this podcast.
Is that
You you
right?
you you, you
Yeah,
you set such a high bar, Gladys. I don't know. Everybody
You
behind you
guys
is
are
going to have
funny.
trouble now.
yeah,
But
I agree.
Well,
Yeah, I
thank
just
you for
wanted
that, but
to,
I think not. Everyone will do just fine.
yeah. I think that's most of our time today, Gladys. I just wanted to thank you personally for coming on, being the first guest of the podcast, and we do want to make sure that we get as many people this out to as many people as we can. Just if you're interested in running, or if you're seeing what your cohort is doing, and that they do have the same concerns or problems that you do in each town. So
and Gladys, I
I
just
just
want to say add my thanks because I've been working on some projects outside of local government, and you've always been someone who's sent me things the odd time, which no other person across the province does as much as you do. So I really appreciate you also. I'm not sure how you have the hours to keep everybody in your thoughts and in your heart, but I appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Well, thank you both. You both
thanks,
have
Gladys.
done lots to inspire me as well. So this all just goes round. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Thanks everybody for tuning in this edition of Day-to-Day Democracy. Thanks to our amazing guest, Mayor Gladys Atrill from Smithers. Thank you, Brian, for being such a great co-host, and look forward to who's our next guest, Brian? Who's coming up?
Mayor Merlin Blackwell in a couple of weeks, and we're going to talk
Okay,
about similar things, but now we're going to focus in on some ER issues and provincial issues that Merlin advocates for, which
District of Clearwater, the
yeah,
mighty the mighty District of Clearwater. So Merlin's a fantastic guy, and I look forward to also talking with him as well.
yeah, awesome. See you, everybody.
Hey, everybody, thanks, Brian.